Truman's Lie. My name is Audie Murphy, and 3 months ago I believed I was a hero. I'd broken up a Soviet spy network, saved America's atomic secrets, and earned the personal thanks of President Truman himself. But what I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about that mission, about our government, and about the price of truth in the corridors of power. It started with Margaret Sinclair's death in federal prison on December 3, 1947. I was in my Hollywood apartment when Agent Richardson called with the news. His voice was flat, professional. "Margaret Sinclair is dead," he said without preamble. I set down the script I'd been reading. How? Apparent suicide. Found her this morning hanging from a bedsheet in her cell. No witnesses. No note. Margaret Sinclair, the brilliant woman who'd orchestrated one of the most sophisticated spy networks in American history. Dead by her own hand. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt wrong. After I hung up, I sat thinking about the last time I'd seen Margaret alive. She'd been in federal custody, awaiting trial, but she'd asked to see me. I'd expected her to beg for mercy. Instead, she'd looked me straight in the eye and said something that had haunted me for months. "You have no idea what you've really done, do you, Audie?" At the time, I'd assumed she was trying to get under my skin. But now, sitting alone with the news of her death, those words took on a different weight. Margaret Sinclair wasn't the type to give up. She was a fighter, a true believer who thought she was saving the world. Even when I arrested her, she'd maintained that defiant certainty that she was on the right side of history. For her to kill herself just weeks before her trial? It didn't fit. But something else bothered me even more. In all my time investigating her network, I'd never found evidence that she was in it for money or traditional ideology. Every conversation, every document, pointed to someone who genuinely believed she was preventing nuclear war. She wasn't a communist. She was a pragmatist who thought America's atomic monopoly would lead to global catastrophe. 3 days later, when Richardson called to say they were cleaning out Margaret's cell and asked if I wanted to see her personal effects, I didn't hesitate. The federal building in downtown Los Angeles was gray concrete and small windows. Richardson met me at security looking tired and older than his years. The Margaret Sinclair case had taken a toll on all of us. "How are you holding up?" I asked as we walked through the corridors. "Better, now that it's over?" He glanced at me sideways. "You?" Still processing it all. We stopped at a door marked Evidence Storage. Richardson led me into a small room with a cardboard box labeled Sinclair Margaret Personal Effects. "Not much for a life," Richardson said, opening the box. "We've been through everything twice. No hidden messages, no suicide note, just personal items." The contents were sparse. A few books, poetry by Walt Whitman, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, some letters from her sister, a small jewelry box with a pearl necklace, a fountain pen, and a small leather diary with most pages blank. I picked up the Whitman collection, thumbing through pages that had been read countless times. Margaret had underlined passages, political poetry mostly, and philosophical verses about democracy. As I flipped through pages near the back, a small piece of paper fell out. Richardson bent to pick it up, but I was faster. The note was in Margaret's handwriting. A.M. The documents were real. T lied to you. Real Los Alamos is in Nevada, not New Mexico. They wanted the leak. Check Treasury records, March 1947 MS. My blood went cold. Richardson was watching me carefully. "What is it?" I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Nothing. Just a bookmark. Richardson's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press. I spent another 10 minutes going through the remaining items. But my mind was racing. The documents were real. T lied to you. T for Truman. But why would Truman lie to me about the documents being fake? What possible reason could he have for wanting Soviet spies to steal atomic secrets? Unless he wanted the Soviets to have those secrets. The thought was treasonous, but once it took hold, it wouldn't let go. I started thinking about everything that had seemed odd during the operation. How quickly I'd been given classified access. How easily I'd gotten close to all three suspects. How Margaret had seemed almost to want to be caught, revealing herself at the Soviet embassy in a way that was almost theatrical. What if it had all been theater? What if I'd been the unwitting star of an elaborate performance designed to cover up something much bigger? That night, I couldn't sleep. Margaret's note kept running through my mind, along with her final words. They wanted the leak. If Margaret was right, then I hadn't uncovered a spy network. I'd provided cover for a deliberate leak of atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. The next morning, I drove to Pasadena to visit Dr. Robert Hendricks, a physicist I'd met during the investigation. He worked at Caltech and had struck me as someone who valued truth over politics. I found him in his office, grading papers. When I knocked, he looked up with surprise. "Mr. Murphy, this is unexpected. Please, come in." "Dr. Hendricks, I need to ask you about something confidential." He set down his pen. "Of course. How can I help?" During our investigation, we recovered documents that Margaret Sinclair had stolen. But later, President Truman told me those documents were fake, that the real research was being conducted elsewhere. Dr. Hendricks frowned. Fake documents? That's unusual. What kind of documents were they? I described what I'd seen. Technical specifications, research notes, equations. As I talked, Hendricks's frown deepened. "Mr. Murphy, what you're describing sounds like legitimate research documents, highly classified research. I can't imagine why anyone would create fake versions that detailed and accurate. So, you think they were real? Based on what you've told me? Yes. Almost certainly real?" He paused, nervous. "You mentioned the president said the real research was elsewhere?" "That's right. He said Los Alamos was essentially a decoy." "Mr. Murphy, I can tell you with certainty that Los Alamos is our primary atomic research facility, not a decoy, the primary facility. There might be smaller programs elsewhere, but nothing that would make Los Alamos expendable." I felt sick. If Hendricks was right, then Truman had lied to me directly about something of monumental importance. "Dr. Hendricks, what would happen if those documents fell into Soviet hands? Catastrophic. They would accelerate their atomic program by years, maybe decades. We estimate it would take them at least 10 years to develop atomic weapons independently. With our research data, maybe 3 or 4 years. I thanked Dr. Hendricks and left, my mind reeling. If he was right, then Margaret Sinclair had been participating in the greatest intelligence coup in history, and I'd helped cover it up. Over the next week, I conducted my own investigation. I reached out to contacts from my war days, asking seemingly innocent questions about policy debates and scientific programs. Slowly, I began to piece together a terrifying picture. There had been heated debates within the Truman administration about whether America should maintain its atomic monopoly. Some officials, particularly in the State Department, believed nuclear weapons were too dangerous for any one country to control. They thought creating a balance of terror might actually prevent nuclear war. The logic was coldly pragmatic. If both America and the Soviet Union had atomic weapons, neither would dare use them. Mutual assured destruction would replace American nuclear hegemony as the guarantor of peace. But Congress and the American people would never approve of deliberately sharing atomic secrets with the Soviet Union. Any official policy of nuclear proliferation would be political suicide. What if atomic secrets could accidentally fall into Soviet hands through espionage operations that were allowed to succeed? The administration could maintain plausible deniability while achieving their strategic objective. I found evidence of secret meetings between State Department officials and Soviet representatives. Classified documents accidentally left unsecured. Security protocols mysteriously relaxed at key facilities before suspected espionage attempts. And then I found the smoking gun. It was buried in a War Department file I wasn't supposed to access. A memorandum dated 2 weeks before the Margaret Sinclair operation began. From President Truman to his Secretary of State, outlining a strategy for controlled intelligence sharing with the Soviet Union. The memo was written in careful bureaucratic language, but its meaning was clear. It specifically mentioned atomic research documents that could be allowed to fall into Soviet hands through a carefully orchestrated operation providing plausible deniability. The memo outlined 3 criteria. It had to appear to be a genuine counterintelligence success. It had to involve the arrest of actual Soviet agents, and it had to be conducted by personnel unaware of the operation's true purpose. My hands shook as I read it. The entire Margaret Sinclair operation had been planned from the beginning. I hadn't uncovered a spy network. I'd participated in a deliberate leak of atomic secrets. The most disturbing part was the final paragraph discussing expendable assets, people who could be sacrificed to maintain credibility. Margaret Sinclair and her network weren't just Soviet spies. They were fall guys, deliberately exposed to provide cover for the real intelligence transfer. But why would Truman want to give atomic weapons to Stalin? The answer came in another document from the State Department's policy planning staff. It outlined the administration's fear that America's atomic monopoly would lead to increasingly aggressive foreign policy. Military planners were already talking about using atomic weapons against Soviet installations. Some generals advocated for preemptive nuclear strikes. The State Department argued this thinking was madness. A nuclear war could destroy civilization. The only way to prevent American leaders from being tempted to use atomic weapons aggressively was to ensure any attack would provoke massive retaliation. It was a terrifying gamble, intentionally proliferating the most destructive weapons ever created, hoping mutual fear would preserve peace. But from the perspective of preventing nuclear war, it had twisted logic. The problem was this policy could never be implemented openly. The American people weren't ready to voluntarily give up their military advantage. Congress would never approve such a strategy. So it had to be done in secret, through operations like the Margaret Sinclair network. Soviet spies would steal exactly what the American government wanted them to steal. The spies would be caught to maintain the illusion of security, but not before transmitting crucial information. And investigators like me would provide credibility to the charade. The weight of discovery was crushing. 17 Americans were in federal prison because of my investigation. Margaret Sinclair was dead, and all of it had been orchestrated by the president himself. I thought about confronting Truman directly, but what would that accomplish? He would deny everything, destroy evidence, and probably have me arrested. The documents I'd found were classified beyond my clearance level. Instead, I arranged to meet Agent Richardson at a diner in Santa Monica, far from government buildings. "What's on your mind, Murphy?" he asked after we'd ordered coffee. "I've been thinking about something Margaret Sinclair said. She claimed she was trying to prevent nuclear war." Richardson shrugged. "They all have justifications. Spies always think they're saving the world. But what if she was right? What if giving atomic weapons to the Soviets actually would prevent a war?" Richardson's eyes narrowed. "That's dangerous thinking, Murphy. Are you having second thoughts?" "I'm having second thoughts about whether the documents Margaret stole were really fake." The change in Richardson's expression was subtle, but unmistakable. Surprise, quickly masked. What makes you think they weren't fake? I've talked to physicists. They think the documents sounded too legitimate to be forgeries. Physicists can be wrong. Can they? Or were we wrong about what we were really doing? Richardson stirred his coffee with deliberate precision. Murphy, you did good work. Sometimes it's best not to second-guess decisions made by people with access to information you don't have. What if those people are lying? Then that's above your pay grade and mine. I realized Richardson knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. He'd been part of the deception, too. Agent Richardson, what happens when the Soviets test their first atomic bomb? What do you mean? When they detonate a weapon based on research from documents stolen by Margaret's network, what happens to the people who helped cover up that theft? Richardson's hand shook as he lifted his coffee cup. I think this conversation is over. He left money and walked out, leaving me alone with my growing certainty that I'd uncovered something monstrous. Over the following months, I watched the news with dread. Reports of Soviet nuclear research, intelligence estimates of their progress, official statements about America's determination to maintain atomic advantage. All of it was theater. The Soviets were going to have atomic weapons within years, and the American government had ensured it. In September 1949, my worst fears were confirmed. The Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb years ahead of estimates. The American atomic monopoly was over. President Truman's public response was shock and concern. He convened emergency meetings, spoke gravely about new threats, called for increased military spending. He never mentioned that his administration had deliberately accelerated Soviet nuclear development. The newspapers speculated about how the Soviets developed weapons so quickly. Some blamed espionage, technically true. Others pointed to Soviet scientific intelligence, also true but beside the point. None came close to the real explanation, that the American government had decided a nuclear-armed Soviet Union was preferable to an America tempted to use its atomic monopoly aggressively. I thought about going public with what I knew. But who would believe me? I was just a soldier who'd stumbled into an intelligence operation. My word against the president and the entire national security establishment. And even if people believed me, what would that accomplish? The atomic age had begun. The weapons were built. The world had changed forever. So I kept quiet. I made movies, gave interviews, played the role of America's most decorated soldier. But inside, I carried the knowledge that I'd been used as a pawn in a game whose true purpose I'd never understood. The Margaret Sinclair network hadn't been destroyed. It had been allowed to succeed. The documents hadn't been recovered, they'd been delivered. And I hadn't saved America's atomic secrets, I'd helped give them away. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years fighting for democracy, believing I was defending freedom, but I'd discovered that even in a democracy, truth could be classified, manipulated, and buried so deep that most people would never know what was done in their name. Margaret Sinclair had died believing she was a patriot. The 17 network members were still in prison, convinced they'd fought for a righteous cause. And maybe they were right. Maybe preventing nuclear war was worth any price, including truth. But I'll never know for sure. Because the people who made that decision never asked my opinion. They just used me to carry it out. That's the real lesson from the Margaret Sinclair operation. In the world of espionage, there are no heroes and villains. There are only people making impossible choices with incomplete information, hoping history will judge them kindly. Sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is betrayal. Sometimes the most treasonous act is loyalty. And sometimes the only way to serve your country is to lie to the people who trust you most. I've carried this knowledge for years, and it's changed everything about how I see the world. Every government statement, every official explanation. I wonder what's hidden beneath the surface. The Margaret Sinclair operation taught me that the real enemy isn't always the one you can see. Sometimes it's the one giving you orders. Sometimes it's the system you've sworn to defend. And sometimes it's the part of yourself that would rather believe a comfortable lie than face difficult truth. I don't know if President Truman was right. Maybe giving atomic weapons to the Soviets really did prevent nuclear war. Maybe the balance of terror really has kept peace. But I know he lied to me, and through me, to the American people. And I know that somewhere in classified files there's a record of my role in one of the most successful intelligence operations in history. An operation I thought I was trying to stop. Now I have to ask you something. If you discovered that your own government had deliberately given away military secrets to an enemy because they believed it would prevent a war, would you support that decision? Would you accept that sometimes democracy requires undemocratic actions to survive? And here's the harder question. How many lies are you willing to accept from your leaders if they tell you those lies are necessary for national security? Because once you start down that road, once you decide that truth is too dangerous for ordinary citizens to know, where does it end?